Welcome to the Reality Reset, where illusions are shattered and the comfortable lies you tell yourself are left in tatters. Enter Tim Wheatley, a force of nature who isn't here to soothe your ego. He's here to rip open the carefully constructed narratives you've been hiding behind. This isn't another feel-good, sugar-coated podcast. This is where you come to confront the uncomfortable truths buried deep within you. The truths that sting, that provoke, and that you've been too scared to admit. So, are you ready to face the raw, unfiltered depths of your mind? Because once we start, there's no going back. It's time to reset everything you think you know. Is it forgiveness or is it fawning? In this podcast, we will discuss the dark side of forgiving too soon. Forgiveness is often celebrated as the ultimate virtue, a sign of spiritual maturity and emotional intelligence. But what if forgiving too quickly is actually a defense mechanism rooted in fear? In this bold episode of the Reality Reset, we tackle the uncomfortable truth about how forgiveness can become a fawn response, a way to avoid conflict, keep the peace, and maintain relationships at the cost of your own boundaries. Are you forgiving to heal, or are you forgiving to survive? Is forgiveness being used to accept toxic situations rather than confront them? It's time to dive into the shadow side of forgiveness, where unresolved wounds often hide. Get ready to rethink one of the most sacred tenets of self-help.
Welcome back to the Reality Reset, where we don't just repeat self-help slogans, we break them down and challenge what's really going on underneath. I'm your host, and today we're talking on a topic that's sure to make some people squirm: forgiveness. Now, don't get me wrong, at its best, forgiveness is transformative. It's freeing, it's healing, it's liberating. But here's a twist: sometimes forgiving too quickly isn't virtuous, it's self-abandonment. And that's where we're going today, into the shadow side of forgiveness. We're exploring how forgiveness can become a fawn response, a knee-jerk reaction to maintain relationships at any cost, even at the expense of your own well-being. Let's start with a truth that no one wants to admit. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about love or compassion, it's about fear. It's a survival tactic rooted in childhood conditioning, especially for those who learned that keeping the peace is safer than rocking the boat. If you grew up in an environment where conflict felt threatening, you might have learned to forgive and forget as a way to avoid the discomfort of confrontation. But here's the problem: when you forgive too quickly, you often bypass the pain and bypass the boundaries that needed to be set. And these are authentic boundaries, not on the boundaries to avoid feeling that. So let's be real. How often do you forgive because you truly want to let go? And how often do you forgive because you're scared to hold your ground? This brings us to the concept of the fawn response. If you're familiar with trauma responses, you've probably heard of fight, flight, or freeze, but there's that fourth one, fawning. Fawning is essentially people-pleasing on steroids. It's when you accommodate, appease, and yes, even forgive to avoid conflict. It's an unconscious strategy to maintain safety by making sure everyone else is okay, even if it means sacrificing your own boundaries. Now let's apply this to forgiveness. Think about a time when someone hurt you deeply, maybe a partner, a friend, or even a parent. The logical response might be to protect yourself, to create distance, or at least to hold them accountable. But instead, you might find yourself saying, "It's okay, I forgive you," even when it's not okay. Why? Because you're terrified of losing the relationship, or you're terrified or afraid of being seen as difficult. In this case, forgiveness isn't genuine. It's a way to keep the peace and maintain the connection, no matter how toxic it might be. Let's call this what it is: premature forgiveness. It's forgiveness that happens too soon, often before you've even processed the hurt. And while it might make you feel temporarily relieved, it doesn't actually heal the wound. Instead, it keeps you stuck in a loop of self-neglect, where you're constantly putting others' needs above your own. Now, I know this sounds counterintuitive, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that forgiveness is always a good thing. But here's the question you need to ask yourself. Are you forgiving to heal, or are you forgiving to survive? When forgiveness comes from a place of strength, it's about reclaiming your power and releasing the hold that resentment has on you. But when it comes from a place of fear, it's about maintaining the illusion of safety, even if that safety is a lie. It's a quick fix. It's not a resolution. It's saying, I'll forgive you, while silently screaming inside, please don't leave me. This is where the shadow side of forgiveness shows up. Forgiving prematurely often leads to self-betrayal. It's when you prioritize the relationship over your own boundaries, your own needs, your own sense of self. It's a sneaky way of accepting toxic situations because you're afraid to confront them. You tell yourself you're being the bigger person, you're taking the high road, but what's really happening is that you're shrinking. You're giving up parts of yourself to maintain a false sense of peace. So what are the unconscious negative aspects of forgiveness? Here's a big one. It can be a form of gaslighting yourself. When you forgive too soon, you're essentially telling yourself that your feelings don't matter as much as keeping the relationship intact. You're invalidating your own pain and ignoring your own self-identity, what you need. You're sending yourself the message that what you feel isn't as important as what someone else feels. This is not the kind of forgiveness that heals. It's a kind that festers. It's the kind that leaves you feeling resentful, drained, and empty, even if you can't quite figure out why. It's not sustainable. It's like trying to bridge over a sinkhole. The structure will collapse sooner or later because the foundation is unstable. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Forgiving too quickly can actually reinforce toxic behavior. If someone knows they can hurt you and receive instant forgiveness, what's stopping them from doing it again? When you forgive without holding the other person accountable, you're essentially giving them a free pass to disrespect you. It's not just about boundaries, it's about basic self-respect. Now let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that forgiveness isn't valuable. It is, when it's done from a place of true healing. But real forgiveness requires time, processing, and often confrontation. It's not about sweeping things under the rug or pretending everything's okay when it's not. It's about facing the pain head on, acknowledging the hurt, and then choosing to let go once you've fully honored your own feelings. It's about looking for ways that protect you while still allowing for potential reconciliation. In spiritual terms, forgiveness should be about liberation, not submission. It's meant to free you, not bind you to toxic patterns. It's about owning your story, not erasing it to make someone else comfortable. So here's my challenge for you. The next time you find yourself forgiving someone, pause. Ask yourself, am I forgiving from a place of strength or a place of fear? Am I forgiving to heal, or am I forgiving to avoid conflict? If it's the latter, you might want to hold off on forgiving, at least for a little while. Allow yourself to feel the full range of emotions. What are your needs? Once that's set, when you know what they are, and only then, when you're truly ready, consider forgiveness as a choice, not an obligation. True forgiveness isn't about avoiding the pain, it's about transforming it. It's about integrating the lesson, not bypassing the experience. And it's definitely not about fawning to keep the peace. Thanks for joining me on this raw, real episode of The Reality Reset. Remember, forgiveness is powerful when it's authentic, but dangerous when it's forced. So, stay bold, stay curious, and don't settle for the illusion of peace when real peace is possible. Until next time, keep resetting your reality.